I'm Dustin Homan, and welcome to the Presidential Approval Podcast. On this episode, we will be exploring the determinants or factors that influence presidential approval ratings. Presidential approval is the public's level of approval or disapproval of the president's job performance. According to Clausen and Oxley, in general, high approval ratings can be thought of as a form of political capital that allows the president to pursue his goals. 5 factors, or determinants as we will call them, have been identified and studied by political gurus as contributing to and influencing a president's approval rating. This podcast will explore each of them and provide examples.
I'd like to just announce the spectacular news for American workers and American families and for our country as a whole. There's not been anything like this, record-setting. It was just put out that the United States economy added almost 5 million jobs in the month of June.
That was former President Donald Trump giving an update on the U.S. economy July 2nd of 2020. That clip helps to introduce our first determinant, which is the state of the economy. Now, the state of the economy determinant is both objective and subjective in the way that it's measured. Objective measures include inflation, the unemployment rate, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and disposable income. A subjective measure of the state of the economy is the citizens' perceptions of the economy. Now, this determinant can have either a positive or negative effect on presidential approval based on the strength, or lack thereof, of the economy during a president's tenure. Studies also show that this determinant is heavily weighted in citizens' perceptions and thereby their approval of a president. Using Donald Trump as an example, the Dow Jones Industrial Average hit a low point of around 19,000 in March of 2020. A month later, unemployment peaked at almost 15%. As a result, Donald Trump had one of his lowest presidential approval ratings, according to Gallup, of around 39%. However, just a few months later, around the time he gave this speech, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had rebounded to almost 26,000 in July. Unemployment was down to 10%, and as a result, President Trump's ratings increased by 2% to 41%.
Today, as president, I ask for your support in a decision I've made to stand up for what's right and condemn what's wrong, all in the cause of peace. At my direction, elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, as well as key units of the United States Air Force, are arriving today to take up defensive positions in Saudi Arabia.
That was former President George H.W. Bush, August 8th of 1990, helping to introduce our second determinant of presidential approval, Rally Around the Flag events. The Rally Around the Flag determinant involves foreign events involving the U.S. that are both highly publicized and perceived as a win by the public. These type of events have a positive effect on presidential approval because they invoke a sense of patriotism in the public. Now, this determinant may not be weighted as heavily as the previous determinant, the economy determinant. However, it can still have a dramatic impact. An example is from this clip, when George H.W. Bush's approval ratings increased from 60% to 74% after he sent troops to Saudi Arabia in response to Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait.
Tonight, we meet in a world blessed by the promise of peace. From the moment Operation Desert Storm commenced on January 16th, until the time the guns fell silent at midnight 1 week ago, this nation has watched its sons and daughters with pride, watched over them with prayer. As Commander-in-Chief, I can report to you our armed forces fought with honor and valor, and as President, I can report to the nation, aggression is defeated, the war is over.
That was once again former President George H.W. Bush addressing the U.S. Congress on March 6th of 1991. And his speech helps to introduce our third determinant of presidential approval, the presence or absence of war. Presidential approval is affected by whether our commander-in-chief oversees a prolonged foreign military conflict. I chose to use President George H.W. Bush for both this determinant and the previous one, which was the rally around the flag events, because this one event, our involvement in the Persian Gulf, both boosted and caused a precipitous decline in his approval ratings. In fact, the launch of a war campaign, which may be considered a rally around the flag event, may boost presidential approval, as it did with George H.W. Bush at the start of the Persian Gulf War. However, the ongoing presence of war tends to cause declines in presidential approval as casualties and the cost of the war climbs, which is what we also see with George H.W.'s approval. In fact, his approval dropped from 74% at the start of the invasion all the way down to 58% shortly before the war concluded, according to Gallup. Interestingly, though, a president keeping the U.S. out of the war, or the absence of one, does not seem to affect a presidential approval rating.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never told anybody to lie, not a single time, never. These allegations are false.
That was former President Bill Clinton, January 26, 1998, delivering words that are etched in so many of our memories. His words also helped to introduce our fourth determinant of presidential approval, scandals. Dictionary.com defines scandal as disgraceful or discreditable actions, damage to reputation, public disgrace. This is the closest determinant we have of how the public evaluates a president's character, including his integrity and competence. Now, similar to the war determinant, the lack of scandals does not boost presidential approval, but it doesn't hurt it either. However, the presence of scandals lowers approval ratings, no surprise. But the scandal determinant may be weighted less than other determinants, such as the economy, based on research done by a political scientist by the last name of Carroll. He analyzed President Clinton's approval ratings during the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Carroll compared Clinton's presidential approval ratings with his favorability ratings. Favorability ratings are how much people like the president. His most intriguing finding was with President Clinton's favorability ratings, which dropped 15 percentage points after the Monica Lewinsky scandal and preceding impeachment trial, while his actual approval ratings only dipped slightly. In fact, his highest approval rating actually came during the impeachment process. This evidence supports that this determinant may not be weighted as much as others when it comes to presidential approval.
I urge every American to join in this effort to bring justice and hope to all our people and to bring peace to our land.
That was former President Lyndon B. Johnson, July 2nd, 1964, shortly after he had signed the Civil Rights Act into law. This clip helps to introduce our fifth and final determinant of presidential approval, extraordinary domestic events. Extraordinary domestic events are similar to rally around the flag events in that they are highly publicized events, except these are focused domestically rather than internationally. Examples include natural disasters in the U.S. and racial uprisings, such as the George Floyd murder. Their influence on presidential approval depends on both the nature of the event and the president's response. For example, President Johnson's approval increased after he signed the Civil Rights Act, yet President Ford's approval decreased when he pardoned President Nixon for crimes committed during the Watergate scandal. In conclusion, this podcast has explored 5 factors or determinants influencing a president's approval rating: the state of the economy, rally around the flag events, presence or absence of war, extraordinary domestic events, and scandals. Also, presidential approval is arguably the most cited statistic in American politics. But presidential approval ratings are only part of the story, according to Ponder. Ratings must be taken into consideration along with how well the public thinks other branches of government are doing, especially Congress. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Presidential Approval.